Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Welcome to the Yogananda podcast. We're on chapter 6 now, the first part of chapter 6, and here with the usual crowd, Lauren, Mike, and Chris.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Chris has got a fancy new gadget, so he should sound super awesome.
Took a little bit of time to set it up, but we're here.
Much to my dismay. I must not have hidden it very well. But yeah, chapter 6. It is entitled, Chris.
The Tiger Swami.
Indeed. The Tiger Swami. It's let's talk briefly about our expectations from the chapter. So firstly, the Tiger Swami is quite a title, isn't it, of the chapter? It's in keeping with the theme of fantastic titles that we're now getting accustomed to. The previous chapters that had mysterious titles were things like the Saint with Two Bodies and the Perfume Saint, and now we have the Tiger Saint, essentially. Mike?
It's definitely the title that when I heard of it, I was like, oh God, I got to read that one. That sounds really interesting. And I think there's quite a good number of people who say that's their favorite chapter.
Interesting. Laura?
It's really unusual, isn't it? It's like a mix of two different worlds almost. When you come to it at first, you think, how can there be a Swami of tigers? How does this work? You know, it creates that like instant intrigue if you've seen it for the first time.
My initial take on this, when I first read the title, I thought, okay, there's going to be a Swami that makes, tame pussycats out of tigers that has been mentioned before, but it's quite the opposite in some ways, and we're going to delve into that throughout the chapter as to the juxtaposition there and the beautiful analogies throughout this chapter. But I initially thought, oh, this is going to be a cool sort of teaching about how, the powers of a Swami could, make any ferocious beast, bend the knee, but it's a lot more ferocious in reality.
That's right. I thought of that too, wasn't it? What was his name? Cousin Jitendra, right? Who heard about the tigers and then jumped ship and ran away because of that. Yeah.
Yes, he snaked away the scaredy cat. This time he was scared of not just normal cats, but the most ferocious of cats, which is the tiger. And that's really why you'd say the most gross way why people are so interested in this chapter, because the tiger has got such a reputation for intrigue and mystery and majesty and power as well. And power is an interesting one. Like you always, as children, you always have that debate, which of the big cats is the strongest and most ferocious, etc. And you'll usually, when I was younger, we did some research, and the tiger is like the biggest, even compared to the male. It's the heaviest and the most muscular. Even compared to the male lion, it's bigger and heavier than even that. Yeah, Mike?
And I heard there's people who even cross tigers and lions, and then you can create an animal called a liger, which somehow keeps growing throughout their whole life, and they get really, really big. I don't know if it's healthy or if it's good for them, but they get really large.
And you also have a tie-on. Depending on which way you round, you have the male of the species when you're combining them. Yeah, they don't breed well going forward. They have genetic problems and things like that. So, but I don't think in nature they wouldn't necessarily cross each other's paths. So in nature it wouldn't happen. Hence, probably it's not allowed to happen, even if you experiment. But back to the tiger. So did you know that the tongue of a tiger has got like these barbed like protrusions that are enough to tear your flesh off your skin?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So not that you'd want to attempt to let it do anything such as that, but that's how fiercely powerful a tiger is. Chris?
You could draw a pretty good analogy with, having a sharp tongue and doing damage with that tongue. That the tiger sort of represents the inner prowlers, is what we'll talk about later. But yeah, it's good.
Chris has got the softest of tongues, so I don't expect you to relate with this fierce tongue analogy. The reason we talked about this, because this is the reason why everyone wants to read this chapter, whoever may pick up the book, be they a youth or someone who's never heard of what a Swami is or a yogi is. Everyone knows what a tiger is, and everyone loves the tiger, and hence we want to go to this chapter. Going on, so the tiger Swami, or Soham Swami, is the English pronunciation of his name. We're going to delve into his life a little bit and how he triumphed, using willpower to basically overcome virtually impossible outward circumstances. But he also had to suffer because he took a bit of he became a bit prideful, shall we say, in his capabilities or in his perceived power, and he did suffer a little bit. And I've got a similar story. Mike and Lauren, you may have seen my recent Instagram post where I was trying to subdue the foxes in my garden and the cats in my garden using nature's the barbed wire, which is basically a thorns. So I fashion some thorn things, and obviously it's going to scratch and probably hurt a poor cat or or fox, but you have to do what you have to do. But you've seen my garden now, so you've seen how easy access it is, how easy
pristine, like a real English garden. Yes.
But even I became a bit too what should we say, a bit confident, and the thorns got their full measure on me as well as I was fashioning those things. So I was thinking of the poor tiger Swami, and I was thinking, yep, you have to pay your debt in one way or the other.
So now you know how the foxes and the cats will be feeling if they come into contact.
I won't be repeating that mistake, and hence hopefully the fox won't be. Because they can just walk. There's a nice walkway around the side they could go, but they like going through the gardens.
Don't you like cats and foxes?
I wouldn't mind. I love them actually, but they do their business in the most improper of places on my premises. It becomes a problem.
Plants.
No.
There's a silver lining to everything, folks.
Anyway, we digress. Writing style is equally punchy in this chapter. You might say Oscar-worthy, like the bit before he was, Paramahansa Yogananda was describing a journey of, cheating and lying and all that kind of stuff to get to the Himalayas. And now he's, using his, flexing his linguistic capabilities to describe action. And this is probably the most action-packed sequences in the book. So we can look forward to delving into that and breaking that apart a bit and looking at if there's any messages in there for us, which there is. And also then we have interventions from a strange Swami, another strange Swami, common theme, interventions from illustrious spiritual personalities. And this is another Tibetan master that intervened this and became the guru of Tiger Swami, Soham Swami. And and we'll get to that. And he obviously in some way had a longing for the guru, and the guru then came to him in a very strange way, shall we say, but one that would be of interest to break down. So there's that. So let's now crack on to the first part of the chapter. And there's some interesting lessons here for us about the enthusiasms of youth, in the sense that they get very excited, don't they? in this, especially in explaining this narrative. But in there's a few gems. So let's just dig straight in. So we start with basically a rumor. Chandi has essentially come to Mukunda. Mukunda, we know, loves fantastic tales of swamis and power and mysticism. He loves all of that. And so Chandi knew that Mukunda would be receptive to this rumor. So he says, I have his address, let us find him. And then Mukunda says, or Paramahansa Yogananda describes this as a welcome suggestion from Chandi. Mike?
I like that Mukunda is known amongst his friends as someone who is really interested in saints and miracles like that. And whenever they hear anything, they go like, oh, I'm pretty sure Mukunda wants to hear about that. So let's tell him. So he's really built up a reputation already.
And it's not the first time that he'll seek out a saint either in his lifetime. And he continues that throughout his lifetime, traveling around Europe, seeking out saints. So it's the first of many, many, many adventures that he goes on.
So this rumor was gold dust to a young Mukunda's ears. I dare say many of his childhood friends may have tried to played on this and just talk about random swamis that didn't exist. But I'm sure Mukunda was capable of looking into the eyes of the rumors and seeing which ones are real and which ones are prank. One that I was not good at perceiving in my youth. Chandi. Chandi means two things. One is silver, and one is also the moon. So there's two words in there. So Chandi's a nice name. Could also be a girl as well. We don't know. Chandi is often a feminine name. So we don't know if it's a boy or girl. Not that it matters, but just thought I'd put it out there because you probably imagined, all of you, that it's a boy that that's come to him, but it could be a girl. So one of his high school friends, he says, I was eager to meet the saint. And he says that he's eager because he'd fought tigers and caught tigers. And we'd suggested why even, tigers are so interesting for us. But they were obviously also interesting to Mukunda in his youth. Lauren?
My question for you three and any of our listeners, I have a theory, but why do you also think he was so enthusiastic to meet the Tiger Swami? Like, what would be so interesting, do you think, for Mukunda? Mike, what do you think?
I mean, at the end of it, he does say that it kind of fills him with like some kind of boyish enthusiasm, but you'd also have to think that he's actually looking for a guru, right? So I'm not sure if he really thought, oh, the Tiger Swami is going to be my guru, but there's a possibility, right? Wherever you find someone who's a God-realized master, it could be.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point. I wondered if maybe, because it's not been in the book, but if anyone's watched the documentary Awake, Mukunda used to have nightmares about a tiger eating his arm or leg. Which one was it? Do you remember? Priyank, do you know?
One of the two.
One of the two. And, he'd wake up screaming and then his mother would, comfort him and say it's just a dream. So I wondered if, this fascination of being able to tame tigers was partly why he was so enthusiastic about it in his waking dream life on Earth. Who knows? Chris?
Yeah, we know from the chapter itself that he was really enthralled in the story. So he was really interested to hear what the now Swami, had to say about his previous life. So maybe it is simply a boyish kind of mystical charm about the ferocity of tigers, and it's really living in India. Maybe Priyank, you could talk to this a little bit. It's not something that's in the consciousness of people in the UK, but it would be more so for people in India because you actually have that danger there. It's a real reality of life there. So it's probably in the consciousness much more than what it would be over here. So, as a boy, I would be pretty fascinated by them if they were roaming around, potentially around the villages where I was from. I know in Northern Ireland we have, nothing close to
So many tigers.
that.
You have vicious badgers. They can do
Yeah.
some damage, don't they?
Yeah.
Got to look out for the odd house cat, but that's about it.
Yes, and also in lions and zoos, the tiger and the lion. Sorry, in zoos, the lions and the tiger are always the ones that people flock to, and they even in India, and that is because so many of our childhood stories have got tigers and lions in them. There's one very popular one where there's a lion prancing around, and he gets a thorn in his paw. I don't know if you guys have heard this. Have you heard it? I don't know if I think it's an Indian one. It says in one of my Indian Gujarati books, which I've got. So I used to study this when I was in school. So he's roaming around, roaring majestically, and he gets a thorn stuck in his paw, and then obviously he can't get it out because his mouth is massive and the thorn is like this, so he can't do what he tried. He can't get it out, and then he finds a mouse, and a mouse. He was essentially, it started with saying, like, how can you possibly look at the size of you? How can you possibly be of any use to me? And then in the end, the mouse was able to take that thorn out of it for the lion. And the moral of the story is obviously don't underestimate people just because of their size or their perceived power, etc., etc. It's a nice story. So I was saying lions and tigers are in the folklore of lots of our stories, both religious and child stories. And as Chris said, they are around, but thankfully not usually too near any major dwellings, shall we say. There's thankfully there's tiger reserves and lion reserves, and they're very well contained, so they don't tend to, even though there's no physical barrier for them, they seem to, that's the habitat, and they don't go into human habitations and stuff. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, we go to see Babaji's cave near Dwarhat. I think that's either inside the tiger reserve or right adjacent to it. So there, people talk about tigers up there more.
And I can confirm that Yogananda did dream about a tiger that had caught his leg. It was his leg, not his arm.
Leg it is. The meteor of the limbs that we...
That's right. Yeah, he went for the big prize. Yeah.
Yes. So the next line is that he could fight. He wanted to basically find this Swami who could fight tigers with his naked hands, which sounds quite a feat. Naked hands. I would have used bare hands, but naked hands, I don't know. Seems a cool way to use the word naked. Boyish enthusiasm. Now this is important, because if you were just reading a lot of the first few chapters, you wouldn't know that this is a boy of 8 to 14, 15, 16, because it's such mature, like previously, he was philosophizing with this saint, wasn't he? And they were having to and fro, and I dare say like a philosophy professor from a university would have a similar discussion. So we don't actually know just by the English how old he is, as you do when you read other books of childhood, the childhood lives of other autobiographers. But here he actually is making it obvious. He's saying like a boyish enthusiasm over such remarkable feats was strong within me. So he's kind of confirming that, yes, I was a child once, and I was interested in the same things that your child right now is interested in. So I like that he's put in little words in there. And here's the first lesson for the day, childhood lesson. The next line is, the next day dawned wintry cold, but Chandi and I sallied forth gaily. What is the lesson in there? So for me, it's about the being able to overcome bodily discomforts. and he's kind of hidden it in there, isn't he? So there was bitter cold essentially, but they were in exceptionally good spirits. And we may not think that our willpower is very strong when it comes to things like this, but for example, if you've had a very exhausting day, but you're very, physically, if it's been a physically very challenging day, and I told you what you're going to do today, for example, plow the whole field of whatever, and you may think, oh, I'm going to be knackered, tired after that. But if you're very, very engaged, or you're having a lot of fun, or you're very, very concerned about the outcome of the day, then you'd just forget about your bodily trials. You may have creaky knees, you may have neck pains, but during that intense activity of intense involvement, it will just go out of your mind. So I think we're all capable of it, but to put it at the forefront of our awareness that we are capable of it, we can overcome. That's the bigger challenge, Chris.
I don't think I'll ever forget the story where Guruji gets up in the middle of the night basically to prepare food for guests. And isn't it then true that Sri Yukteswar said you'll never suffer from from lack of sleep, the pang of lack of sleep. And it always stuck with me because I thought, wow, like if that's possible to muster the will to overcome this, then it's such a good lesson. But I did this to a degree. So I met my wife through persisting through a very bad dose of snow and weather in London. Got on a train, went to meet a friend, met my wife on the train. So if I didn't pursue, the meeting that I had with a friend, then but for the wintry cold myself, then I wouldn't have met my wife possibly. So it is all good things come from use of willpower.
And of course, I have to bring the example of meditation now. So you have a really long day, you're tired, you're coming home, and what you really want is go to bed, but you still sit down and do this meditation. Oftentimes those are the best meditations I have, because I feel like Guruji or somehow God is rewarding me for just sitting down and doing it.
I also feel like it's doing it with joy. They sallied forth gaily. They didn't just sally forward with determination. They did it joyously and cheerfully. And I think we can forget about this often, can't we? In our own practices, we get so serious, and it's good to be serious, but it's not good to be serious but not solemn, I think is the word. So yes, finding the joy in no matter the circumstance, I think is also a really good, valuable lesson for us.
Indeed. So with that joy, they had to hunt to find the house, even though they had the address. Now, Mike may know, but I'm sure Chris and Lauren might be confused by the fact that if you've got someone's address, why would you be having to hunt down the house? Answer to that is because in India, especially in less urban parts of India, the address is a puzzle. So like there's not obviously a street name, and there's not obviously house numbering as we're used to in the West. So if that being the case, how do you put the address of something? So like my village house address in India is Azad Pole. Azad means freedom. Pole. So it's a lamppost. It's in the locally known as the Freedom lamppost. So everyone knows where that is. And then the address is this person's house near the Azad Pole. Now, if you're in a very big area and there may be 2 or 3 poles that may be Azad poles, then you might go to the wrong one.
Not tourist friendly.
How do people get post? Delivered to the correct
this
address.
is what I'm telling you. So the postman is actually usually very skilled with knowing the community. So even though I haven't lived in India for 25, 30 years, the postman knows who I am. And the reason he knows who I am is because he knows my father, and my father's name is in my name. So my name is Priyank Manubhai Patel. And then the address would be near Azad Pole. So if I get a letter, he would look at my father's name and the house which my father belonged to that house, even though he passed away 35 years ago. He knows where that house is, where that family household is. So like it gets rooted. So the family name becomes very important for these so-called trivial problems. Like,
does Google Maps work at all in those kind of areas?
No.
No, okay.
It's pretty bad. But as I say, we've got other more sophisticated workarounds, i.e. relying on people. Like the good old days. Yes, so they found the right house, and the house had 2 colossal iron rings, which Mukunda, went to town with. Apparently, made a massive racket, probably because of his overexcitement. And he said there was much clamor, but a servant approached with a leisurely gait. Now, if Chris, if I was coming to your house and I made a massive sound such as that with horn and bells and stuff, would your parents come approach with a leisurely gait, or would they? What the is going on? Yeah.
We've got one of those big iron type knockers.
Oh, similar to this then.
Yeah. So you could
But
probably.
if I was hammering away rather than the polite, the British, very, you shouldn't even hear it really.
Probably would just quietly ring the police or something in the back.
Yeah, so the servant pretty much ignored the over enthusiasm and approached with a leisurely gait, and with an ironical smile, which kind of suggested that Mukunda describes that they were powerless to disturb the peace and the calmness of the home. So try as they might, there is nothing they can do. And here is lesson number 2 in this section, Chris.
Just in case anyone's wondering what gait meant, as I was, it refers to the leisurely walk, a person's manner of walking. So you could imagine just kind of casually walking, even though there's Yogananda banging on the door, quite keen to get in. He's not in a rush to get there.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who keeps learning vocabulary in this book, because.
And it's not gate, Chris. That's GATE, which is a gate that blocks the path. No, not that gate.
Yeah.
Yes, we've got to be
GAIT.
Got to be sure. Yes. So here's lesson 2 then, because it says that his ironical smile, which is the servant, implied that the noisy visitors were powerless to disturb the calmness of the saint's home. So noisy visitors refers to themselves in third person now, rather than us saying the third person. So here is the lesson here. So the saint is tried to develop such an aura of peace and calmness that no matter what you do, that is the overarching feeling. Now, personally, I disdain loud noises. And here's the lesson for me: like, I should be able to develop the similar calmness and poise within myself, that even if I'm surrounded by loudness, I should not be so impacted by it. Mike?
It also goes to show that what Guruji's expectations were when he went there. Like, what he found was like a kind of an ashram-like environment, like a very peaceful place. But maybe that's not what he expected. He expected this to be maybe more like an action-filled place where the Tiger Swami lives. Maybe he even had some tigers there, but it was really like that.
I do just want to make a comment on how Yogananda is very happy to refer to himself in this way, as a noisy visitor. It's almost like a foolish action of sorts, like you said, Priyank. Maybe yourself, if you were to be greeted in this way, or somebody was to be knocking on your door in such a way, would you be answering it as so calmly? You might be sort of looking with a bit of a frown and saying, what do you want? Yeah, what business do you have here? But there's Yogananda sort of referring to himself in this way, in a comical way, right? So he's almost willing to act out the role. He's very humble, essentially, and I do love that approach that he has, and it's throughout the book that he refers to himself. He doesn't take himself too seriously, just as you were saying, Lauren. It's good to have that pinch of comedy or ease about you that way.
Next, the next line is feeling the saint's silent rebuke. Now I was a bit confused by this, like, where is the rebuke? But the key word is silent. So the ironical smile that he gave and the undisturbed nature and the leisurely gait that he was walking with, that is the silent rebuke. So I had to really look in there for that because I didn't understand what that meant. Mike?
My impression was the silent rebuke was that they made them wait in the parlor, because I felt like you go in there with all your like being very enthusiastic and they like, calm down, son. I'll just let you sit here for an hour now or half an hour.
Possibly, but that's in the next sentence. So he can't. He doesn't. It's as if he's just responding. The rebuke is from a response. So the next, you're absolutely right. In the next sentence, he says that long wait there. So they were in the parlor, and then they said that their long wait there beset us with misgivings. So then he talks about the next lesson about the India's unwritten law for truth seekers, i.e. patience. And this is quite interesting. A master may purposefully make a test of one's eagerness to meet him through patience. Now, I feel like there should be many stories at the tip of our tongues about how the guru makes us wait, and examples in from stories from in SRF, etc., about the importance of patience. But I for one can't think of one. Mike?
I mean, none of them are like, this is like very much just about the waiting, but oftentimes Guruji wanted things to happen that didn't happen the time he wanted to. For example, when he wanted to go to Kashmir for like 4 summers in a row or something like that. So I guess with the saints, oftentimes you have to wait for the right time for things to happen.
Yeah, I was going to say the same basically, but it's baked into the cake essentially with yoga, where God sort of is very patient, and he makes you wait for your right time to meet with him, essentially, right? So we might enthusiastically say, okay, right, we know the path to God now, let's go, reveal thyself, as Yogananda says, but you sort of have to wait until you're maybe in that time and place. So yeah, I don't have a specific one for you, Priyank, but in general I would agree with Mike there.
And of course, from popular films, there's Far Eastern stories about how, like, the martial arts teachers would make students do monotonous, laborious, painstakingly slow activities to build your patience and your perseverance, like painting a fence.
Wipe on, wipe off.
Wax on.
Or wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax off, wasn't it? Yeah. And then the paint and and also in Kill Bill, she has to do something. Uma Thurman has to do something crazy, don't she, when she's learning her martial arts? Yes. So it's a common theme. If you've got better stories, listeners, which I'm sure you will, please do share, of patience, of the test of patience. So then Guruji has a bit of a joke, and he says that this psychological ruse also is used in the West, i.e. by the waiting rooms of the doctors and dentists that we have to wait and painfully wait for. Mike?
That really made me laugh when I read that. I found that so funny. Like how many times I waiting for a doctor, and maybe not so much in London, but where I grew up in Germany and in Austria, you go to a doctor, there's like no patient, and you're still waiting in the waiting room for some reason.
It's a psychological ruse, Mike. It's like one of those unwritten laws that this is how all of us will develop the patience that we so desire.
Yeah.
I do wonder though how Guruji knew this was true. You know, had he had to go to a doctor's when he was over in the US, or had he heard it from other devotees? I wonder, because it's so accurate, like you say, Mike. It's so funny because it's so true. But I wonder how, you know, I guess he's all knowing, but you know, still.
Well, he used to get doctors to come in on stage, so he may have been in touch with doctors just to go engage them for some of his talks and stuff. But being in, he was in America for so long, so I'm sure if he didn't go to a doctor, he would have heard these, these cultural references such as this, which are true today, as true today as they were back then, which is pretty cool. So now let us go on and actually talk about the Swami himself. So the next section is about that he was finally summoned. They were finally summoned, and then they entered a sleeping apartment where the Swami was. Now, you guys may not know what a sleeping apartment is. Sleeping apartment is essentially people have lunchtime naps, and you don't necessarily retire to the bedroom for your lunchtime nap. This is when the sun is at its fiercest, zenith in the sky, and it's always a nice time after, at this time. You might have been already up for 7 hours, waking up at 6 or whatever, where you'd have a nap, but you wouldn't go to your bedroom. There'd be a room in the middle of the house, essentially. So you'd have the front of the house is like a reception area where you meet a guest, where you may put your shoes, etc. The middle would be this like welcome room, and in that there would be like little sofas that may double up as beds as well. So this is probably where he was, and in the back would be the private quarters where all the family would be, etc. If he had a family. So this is it. This is essentially what he's talking about. So he says now the famous Soham Swami. Now the actual English spelling of his name is Soham Swami. If you actually look it up, which I've put on a Wikipedia page about him. So first we'll talk about his name, because that's the first thing that we're encountering, his name, Soham Swami. Correct, Mike?
So I actually never looked into this before we went through this chapter. But what I always thought is when I heard Soham, I was like, oh, that's Hong Saw backwards, isn't it? And then the meaning is very similar.
Did you think that before you read this card that we're reading?
Yeah. I always thought that. When I heard Soham Swami, I was like, oh yeah, that's like the opposite. Or it sounds very much like it, but it never occurred to me to actually look it up.
Yes.
But I'm glad that this is actually the same.
Yeah, it is the same. So it is derived from that. So as lessons students amongst us, you will know that Hong Saw is one of the techniques that we practice, and this is essentially where this name comes from. His name is from that mantra, a mantra which is Soham. Now, Yogananda has spelt it in the way which is not obvious immediately, but it serves as the right pronunciation. So if you're mentally saying Hong Saw, it is the same if you're mentally saying it Hum Saw. So it's to because of our English, or English pronunciation. If it was spelt in a different way, we may get the mantra wrong, because we don't know how it's written in Sanskrit. We don't read Sanskrit, so he's had to play with spellings of certain words. So when we're doing our practices, we think of them in the right way. And Soham, so Hong is hum. Hum is I. Yeah, that's the Hindi. Even to this day, the Hindi word for I is hum, and So is I am that, or am that, right? So it's I am that. So that is the mantra, hum So. Now, obviously, our practice is linked to that mantra, which we won't go into. But this Swami's name is essentially the practice of the mantra, which is quite cool. You may have, Mike didn't miss it, but I certainly did. Lauren?
It's also interesting that it's not Hong So Swami, it's Soham, which I feel like really is an indication of his level of consciousness. There's no ego left. It's just he, I am, not I am he. Yeah, it's really, really quite telling.
The mantra itself is Soham. Yeah.
Yes.
So in
yes.
the scripture, it's actually Soham.
Yeah.
But for us to get it the right way around when we're doing a practice, which is probably the reason why the practice is called Hong So.
Yes.
Yeah, probably. I don't quote me on that. Right. So the next line is quite a funny one. The sight of his tremendous body affected them strangely. You can imagine two boys seeing like the biggest man that they've ever seen. And on the Wikipedia page, there's a picture of him, a ferocious tiger-looking version of himself, which I'll put a link on so you guys can see. There's a picture of him as he was before, and there's also a monastic version of him, which is what they would have experienced, because he obviously isn't fighting tigers right now. Yeah, Lauren?
I wonder if the photography didn't quite do the body justice, because I have to say, when I looked at the frame of this Swami, I wouldn't necessarily say, whoa, what a humongous body, but cameras can be deceiving. But also, I suppose when you are so small as well, if you are a boy, everything seems so much bigger. But yeah, it's just interesting, isn't it?
He could be 7 foot though. You wouldn't know from the picture.
This is the thing, you would not know. And when you look at the picture, it could be that actually he is towering and just humongous, but the eyes can't really get that depth of perception.
I thought exactly the same. When I saw him, I was like, really, that's him? Okay. But we also have to think that it was a different time. It was before the kind of fitness revolution. It was before Arnie, and it was, people didn't really know what was possible with your body. So I guess maybe at this time he looked off compared to most other people.
But also there's a second element, which is the physical aura of a person. The visually they may look one way, but when you're in the proximity, there might be a completely different feeling. And this is, Guruji has described it so well, like it's tremendous body and it's like bulging eyes, and foot. They've never seen, they said, chest and football like biceps. So football, pretty big. The bicep is the size of a football. That's pretty insane. And then he says he's got an immense neck. But the description is again another indication of the fact that they're children, isn't it? Football like. We as adults we probably wouldn't describe it in that way, but here like he's changing up the English to suit the fact that they were very young and, impressionable at that age. And obviously they did get impressioned by seeing this Swami. But this is the next bit is very mature, shall we say. He says the Swami's fierce yet calm face. Now that's a very unique explanation, isn't it? Fierce yet calm. And then later on he says that he's got like a hint of dove-like and tiger-like qualities. So I was just wondering if you guys have ever met someone that's fierce yet calm, or in equal measure dove-like and tiger-like. Chris?
I worked with a guy who was ex-army, and he would scare me at the same time as make me feel safe for being around him, because he was just this tank of a guy, and he was constantly coming out with stories of, doing tours and things like that in Belfast, actually. English guy, so he had fun stories. And yeah, I think some people, when they're incredibly competent, have the duality there in some way, where they have the ability without using it, and then that gives the sense of peace and calmness, because they know that they're maybe assured of their competency without having to use it. Whereas maybe you get the person who's the opposite of that, who's maybe a bit fiery and fierce because maybe they're making up for a lack of competence somewhere. But yeah, I've met a couple of people like that.
It's funny that you say ex-military, because a few people that I met that are ex-military in the United States, but also in Austria, I feel like a lot of them, they have this kind of vibe about them that we described, that, they have this feeling of, you feel like they have extreme capability, but then they're so calm about themselves. And maybe that calmness came with age. And I can see maybe Soham Swami, he's like a veteran tiger tamer. So he has this aura about him that he's been to war many times, and now he has this calmness about him.
But I imagine to be good at anything, you have to be able to rein in your physical capabilities and act in a calm and collected way. So if you're going to be a good soldier or sergeant, or any of the higher ranks, actually, they probably, if you're going to be successful, you have to have this quality of being able to be aggressive where the aggression is required, but also be able to rein it in when calmness and patience is required. So it should theoretically that should be the way that we see people from military backgrounds, so yeah. And similarly with the Tiger Swami, not so much military, but he's been in many battles. Chris?
I think it's Matthew 5:5 in the Bible that says the meek shall inherit the earth. And I heard a really nice interpretation of it that said, the initial thought might be meek is feeble and sort of weak, and, the gentle of us might ultimately inherit it. It's actually something more along the likings of who keeps his sword sheathed. So who has the ability but does not use it, unless, absolutely necessary. So it doesn't wield the power in ways of maybe taking advantage of it over others in some way. So that kind of came to mind, where that's sort of what we're talking about, this, mass competence, but actually, is serene and peaceful. So it's
Krishna,
a nice quote.
Krishna tells Arjuna that he's blessed because he's been forced into a position where he has to fight. Whereas if he was the aggressor, that's a different thing, but he's actually being forced to fight. So that's like the kind of meek paradigm that you're kind of referring to, isn't it? So yeah, it's quite nice. So the other description here that we glossed over was that, Lauren?
Oh, you may be about to say it. Go on.
Flowing locks, beard, and a moustache.
Yes, indeed. That wasn't what I was going to say.
That wasn't what were you going to say?
I was going to say, we've talked about, the dove-like and the tiger-like qualities, haven't we? But I think what we haven't said yet is that they shone in his eyes. So it wasn't necessarily that an energy that he picked up on, although it probably was too, but it was that it was in those eyes, and it was shining there. Makes you wonder what was it about those dark eyes that shone, with those qualities.
Mm. And he says he had a fierce and yet calm face. So not just his
Yeah.
eyes, but his facial features as well. Probably get that from practicing many years of meditation. You'd hope. Yeah, Mike.
I kind of get this idea of the spiritual warrior when I see him, because I think one of the reasons why he talks about him in the autobiography of a yogi is probably because those are all good attributes for a spiritual seeker. I think because life is like that. You mentioned Arjuna and Krishna earlier, where you say that because life comes at you, attacks you, and you have to kind of be calm in the when things are getting difficult, and then draw your sword only when you really have to in exactly the right moment. And I guess the spiritual battle is a bit like that as well.
Indeed. Yes. So he had flowing locks, beard, and a mustache. Pretty full round head of hair then. There's two pictures of him on the Wikipedia page. I don't think there isn't a picture. I looked in my copy of the autobiography. There wasn't a picture of him in the autobiography. So perhaps it's in a different version. I don't know. But the Wikipedia has pictures of him. So yeah, it matches that description. He was unclothed other than a tiger skin around his waist. Chris?
I did find another one that I just pinged in there as well. And you can look at the proportions because he's sitting next to somebody else who looks like a pretty average kind of size guy. But again, maybe difficult to say. He could be tiny. But you can see his belly's huge, his shoulders are rounded. So it gives you a little bit better, perception of depth and proportions. But that's just on, Google Images, not on Wikipedia, for anyone who's keen.
Okay. So apparently they struggled to find their voices because they were so awe-stricken. And then they said they did their natural thing, which was to admire the physical prowess, his prowess in the feline arena. So paying him a compliment. Good way to start a meeting. So moving on. So then this is now a really good dialogue between the boys and the Swami. And we're not going to cover too much of it in this episode, but we'll cover some. So the bits we're going to cover are really linked to willpower and volition. And there's 3 or 4 very strong hints about why those concepts are important, not just for tiger wrestlers, but also people like us who wish to tackle the tiger mind, the tigers in our minds and our senses. So Mukunda says essentially, will you not tell us how you did such a physically impossible tasks? And I'm paraphrasing, such as fighting the biggest of the most powerful of the jungle animals, or the Royal Bengal tigers. And his response is pretty quick and profound at the same time. He says it's nothing for him to fight tigers. He could do it even today.
If necessary. And I like that he added if necessary, because it's like, you know, we were talking about earlier. If you needed to draw the sword, you would. But if not, why would you?
True.
And it's a complete lack of fear, right? There's a complete fearlessness. Like, I can do it right now. Bring me a tiger. I can do it.
Yeah, which is what I want to get to. And because he says, you look upon tigers as tigers. I know them as pussycats. So it's quite a thing to say, to compare a tiger to a pussycat. But biologically, not untrue, of course. Lauren?
It's also an interesting use of language here, because he says, you look upon the tigers as tigers, so what you perceive, but I know them as pussycats. So inwardly, he knows something that outwardly the, you know, usual day-to-day human would not, you know, which is interesting.
And this really rings to challenging our own limited preconceptions about battles that we have to fight, and being the importance of being in the right state of mind before going into a battle. And here, you know, there's two ways you could look at this tiger. You could look at its pure sheer strength of the tiger and its ability to tear your flesh with a lick of its ferocious tongue, or you can use the pussycat, i.e. the cat that you've seen, you know, through your life and being able to tame. There's no reason why they should behave any differently other than their physical might. They're still the same animal, aren't they? Which is two ways of looking at it. And if you're going to fight a tiger, then you'd be prudent to be able to treat it like a pussycat as opposed to knowing it to be a tiger. So then Mukunda says, very, very, very mature response, Mukunda's response, because he really hears what the Swami has said, because as we just said, there's so much truth in what the Swami has said. And Mukunda says, Swamiji, I think I could impress my subconsciousness with the thought that the tigers are pussycats, but could I make the tiger believe it? Now, this is exceptional, isn't it? Firstly, what a perceptive question, because he's gone to like, he's really now just, he's gone away from being just awe-stricken by his feats and his physical capability. Now he's like really going into how he can apply what this master has been able to do in his own life. Mike?
I mean, that would have been my first question as well. I mean, I'm not 16 now, but that was kind of what I was thinking. And I feel like one is connected to the other. So if I feel like I cannot make the tiger believe it, that would also have repercussions on my own subconsciousness, right? Because then my subconscious will would suddenly think the same thing. So I think he's a pussycat. I think he's a pussycat, but then he doesn't believe it. So does that even matter what I think?
Oh, you're a very capable thinker then. I would not, as a 14-year-old, that's not what I would have said next.
No, that's what I'm thinking now. I have no idea what I would have. I don't know what I would have thought as a 14-year-old.
Then the Swami says, of course, strength is required. You can't expect a baby, essentially, who imagines a tiger to be a house cat to win. So strength is also required. So, but he says then powerful hands are also his sufficient weapon. So that's two sides to being able to defeat a tiger. Lauren?
I feel like that's another lesson for us as well. You know, yes, you can have the mental side, but also the mind and body are interrelated, right? So actually he's saying, well, yes, but also I needed my muscular strength too. So which is interesting, because I think one would assume when you read the title, you think, oh, he's using his mind powers to, you know, overcome these tigers, these beasts, but actually he's using both, which I love personally.
Indeed. So then the next thing was that he asked them to follow him into a different room, into the patio. I remember where I said that you keep your shoes or welcome guests. And then he went to the wall and he crashed, he smashed the wall and made the brick fall to the floor. And the sky then appeared through the gape, he calls it, which is essentially an opening, but not a word that I've seen used before. Mike?
That would have impressed me if I would have seen that. That's like, because I know people who are working out a lot in the gym and who have like big biceps. I don't think they would feel comfortable doing that. I feel like this is more like so he has strength, but he also has the technique that sounds more like a kind of kung fu or karate kind of move, right? Where you kind of hit something really hard, or you break a couple of boards or something like that.
Yeah, this was my thought exactly, Mike. But I think the only thing I'd add to that is conditioning. So he's conditioned his body in a way that not, the person off the street or in the gym with the big muscles hasn't done, which these guys do in mixed martial arts. They condition their hands to take impact. Then maybe there's a lesson again in that you could just read into this in so many awesome ways, that the conditioning of ourselves in yoga and meditation prepares us to be able to, go forward and go on and punch through barriers that maybe we had before.
In the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is about parallel multiverse, parallel universes, one thing that she has to do in one scene, the lady has to learn how to use the smaller finger on your hands to like basically knock the wind, punch someone really hard just with this finger. So then the next like 10 next minute is just her in different universes practicing for hours and hours and months and years just to develop the strength in this little finger for her to be able to do that. It's quite a cool section of the film. But yeah, this demo wasn't really requested. I mean, Mukunda didn't say, and Chandi didn't say, show us, or to see it. He just wandered over and just punched a wall, essentially, which begs the question, how many other holes were there in that wall from previous demonstrations? Doesn't say. One can only imagine. Could have just been an airy wall.
I'm still pondering on this, so I haven't come to any conclusion. I need to think about it some more. But I'm wondering if we've just been given an indication of how tall this man is, because depending on the surrounding of this vicinity, if the sky peers boldly through the gate, that could mean that he was so tall that when he punched straight across, it was eye level with the sky, or it could mean that there was just an open plain and the sky was visible from quite low down. Interesting.
Interesting. Chris?
In a slightly later part to this, the next page, I guess, in the chapter, and not to go into it too much, but he does take a moment to kind of think whether or not he's going to indulge in story time with the boys. So I wonder, by that, could you say that he probably isn't there engaging with anybody that shows up in his door all that much? He really is engaging with Yogananda and his friend because he's Yogananda and his friend, and he actually comments once or twice later in the chapter in a way that made me think like, oh, he recognizes the divinity in Yogananda. So he's probably not just welcoming every boy in, and when they kind of look at him with big starry eyes and say, wow, you're so big, and then he demonstrates his strength by punching walls. So it's a reasonable question, Priyank, but I would imagine there's probably very few, if any, instances that's actually happened. I think the divinity in him, he's recognizing the divinity in Yogananda, and he's engaging with Yogananda in a way for us.
I like it. So your answer is there were no previous other holes This
I
is
think his walls are intact.
this is a brand new, fresh hole,
Yeah,
especially for Mukunda.
that's
And
my bet.
and we know, the importance of the lessons that Mukunda had learnt in his childhood and through all the other masters that he'd met, and how he'd implemented a lot of them for us in our teachings, and volition and willpower and dynamic will and movement of energy is all prana and life force. There's all these are all probably little examples that he's got, and he's made it into he's given us the capability essentially to break this wall as well, if we really practice our energization, maybe. the fencing exercise, if we really go for it.
I'm sure the tiger would be impressed by that.
Yeah. And then so Mukunda essentially was staggered that he could remove a brick with one blow. But I must add a little condition on this, because many of the walls built in India are not great. I'm not saying that it would be easy anyway, but yeah, they're not the perfect walls that you see.
Yeah. Living in Brazil, I can attest to something similar there, where because of the bricks it needed, to keep out the cold and all the rest of it. The bricks we have here in the UK are very different to the bricks used in Brazil. So they're very much lighter, but strong still.
Yeah, but it's still something that I feel like impressed Mukunda. So, I mean, if somebody just goes to a wall and hits a brick out of it, it's something that people usually don't do. I guess they're stable enough to actually keep the cold out and everything. So I wouldn't just be dismissive of it. I was thinking here in California, like most houses are just built from wood. So if you hit really hard against the wall here, there's because that happens every now and then. People like you hit the wall really hard and then you have this big hole in it.
How are the walls in Austria? Are they solid?
I wouldn't hit those walls.
Mukunda then says if he's able to do that, then surely he's able to displace the teeth of tigers. nice wording, technically accurate wording. Displacing rather than just saying knocking some teeth out. Displace. And then the Swami goes on and really hits, really presses home the importance of the mind and the persona, or the aura, as it were, because he says a number of men have physical powers such as mine, but still lack in the cool confidence. So here we've got like a few now examples where we're kind of saying that the look also matters. So if you are fighting a cat, and what is your gait like? Are you against the wall, like ready to just die out of fear, or is your chest out and your eyes out of their sockets with in the moment of the fight? So he's kind of saying also that the look and the confidence and the appearance, all of it, and the reputation as well, all of that is important for basically defeating a superior enemy. It's like he's giving us a kind of a management course on how to be more confident in life. Chris?
But what do you guys think? Can you have confidence without concentration? Or can you have concentration without confidence? Or are the two somewhat linked? Because it kind of occurred to me there that if you're confident, you're almost in that flow. And usually, with true concentration, you can come across quite confident, or at least I perceive people to be confident, but actually they're really concentrated. So actually in that moment, and they're living in that moment, and its competence with that comes with that as well. What do you think?
My feeling is that the confidence needs to come first. So if you're not confident and then you try to make up for it by concentration, then you'll have a really hard time in the moment. But if you have this confidence about you, then I feel like the concentration will just come naturally. And you will just go into like this state of focus.
But if he's been fighting, if you fought 1 trillion tigers, Chris, then he probably doesn't even need to concentrate anymore, does he? He's just doing the Neo in the Matrix after, like when he's figured out everything, he's confidently just batting away Agent Smith's punches.
I don't know, because we know from this chapter, actually, when he loses his concentration in the fight, that's when it goes wrong for him. And he kind of has his confidence knocked a little bit, because it's, as we know in the fight, no spoiler, but he gets hurt, and it's kind of like the first time. So
and he prepares his mind for the fight, doesn't he, before as well, which is interesting.
Jumping way ahead.
We'll find more about that later on. You can all look forward to that. Really back.
We can reflect when we get to that. So yeah, then he says, those who are bodily but not mentally stalwart may find themselves fainting at that sight of a cat roaming freely in the jungle. Chris, Mike?
Yeah, so one thing that's important, like that he mentions, is also the factor of fear, right? So if you have fear, then it's like throwing a wrench in it. So you can't have fear. Fear kind of paralyzes your will, and he does the opposite. He imagines the tiger to be fearful of him, which is kind of, I feel like, the mental way of how to remove your own fear, and instead like create extreme confidence inside you.
Yeah. So then he says that the tiger, a pure natural tiger, especially in its habitat, is different from the circus, heroin, opium-fed, docile tigers that you may find, which is quite sad, isn't it? The fact that we treat animals in that way. But yeah, that's why we shouldn't go to circuses. Hint. And then he says, many a man with Herculean strength has nonetheless been terrorized into abject helplessness before the onslaught of a royal Bengal. And probably true in other walks of life as well, not just royal Bengal, but any situation where, as Mike says, brings about the fear and dropping your confidence or shaking you up a little bit. You forget your Herculean strength that you may have got and may have been spending many years developing. So another little lesson in there for us to remember how strong we are, how much time and energy we spent in developing this air of strength, mental resilience, all that kind of stuff. Shouldn't drop your weapon as Arjuna did in the God Talks with Arjuna. He dropped his bow and fell essentially to the floor, saying he couldn't fight, even though he was the best archer amongst the battlefield. Right, so the next section is, then he says, this is the Swami, the Tiger Swami, he says, thus the tiger then has converted the man in my own mind into a state as fearful as that of the pussycat. Wowza. So he's now playing on the pussycat, and he's saying that now you have become as weak as the pussycat, which is quite profound, which is what some situations where when your mental resilience drops away, this is what happens, isn't it? Trembling. which is what Arjuna, trembling he was, which is not in the description, Yogananda and Krishna, he says this is not befitting of a kshatriya. He's saying this is not fitting of someone in your status, someone with your spiritual capability and your essentially all-conquering nature. This is not befitting of someone in your state. So there's a lot of parallels here to what he's saying here, and what happens essentially to Arjuna and to each of us when we have accepted defeat wrongly. And then he says it's possible that a fairly strong body with an immensely strong determination. Now, immensely strong determination, this is now going to some of the crux of our teachings and then some of the techniques that we practice and the mental state we get ourselves when we're practicing these techniques. So volition is something that Guruji talks about, and he really hits home like the importance of really developing this dynamic and conscious willpower when we're acting and when we're doing our practices essentially, and in every walk of life essentially. So yeah, it's a really nice way of wording it here, and he's used a really profound example that essentially anyone that's got a fairly strong body can defeat a tiger and turn the tables and force it into the conviction of pussycat defenselessness. And that's essentially how he did that. He did all of that. So that's near the end of the section. And then it really ends with Mukunda reflecting, and he's saying he was quite willing to believe that Titans before him were able to perform the tiger pussycat metamorphosis. So he's now essentially been converted. These are lessons that Mukunda is really picking up, and the reason he's included this chapter, I suppose, because we've talked about how many 10 different little lessons that he got from here that were not obvious, and his transition into Yogananda, these little lessons that he brings, not just like hears, but actually makes himself capable of achieving them. This is what has turned him into from Mukunda to a Yogananda. So this is why I suppose Tiger Swami is in this book. Mike?
Yeah, I feel that is also the fact that he was able to convince Mukunda and Chandi of him fighting tigers. That shows how he don't need as much conviction as convincing a tiger that you are going to defeat him, but it shows that he's very strong at projecting his own will at other people, right? So he made quite an impression on them, and I feel like that comes from the same source a little bit, right? As to project your own confidence on a tiger in a fight.
Indeed. And that is where, Chris.
Yeah, just a word there that I actually had to look up because I didn't know what it actually meant. Was like, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but didactic. And I looked it up. Essentially it means that when Yogananda says that the Swami seemed to be in a didactic mood, means that he was in the mood of a teacher, somebody who would actually try to inform and teach, which goes back to what we were saying earlier, maybe that he particularly took a shining to Yogananda, and Yogananda recognized that. And just to go back to what you were saying there, Priyank, like Yogananda has picked up a lot of lessons and learnings. So he was, as it said here, that Chandi and I listened respectfully. He really listens, and he has the wisdom then to learn from a teacher such as this that's taking the time to speak with him.
Indeed. So that was really just the first couple of pages, I suppose, of that chapter 6. Chris, what can we look forward to in the next part?
Yeah, we have the conversation that continues, really, that there's so many lessons that come out of the next part, that it's the power of the mind over the body. We're going to look at that more. Early ambitions and overcoming weaknesses, and the symbology that continues with the tiger, that's pretty powerful in the next section. And then we have, if we have time, we'll try to look at the ominous prediction that follows, that the Swami will delve into his history and pull out of his memory to share with us.
Excellent. So unless anyone's got any more, let us end it there. And thank you very much for joining us into this introduction and first couple of pages of chapter 6, the Tiger Swami. We shall see you next time, where we shall continue. Jai Guru. Bye.
Jai Guru.